Actually, while we're waiting, maybe I'll let the panel introduce themselves. We've already all met Dave, so we'll let the rest of the panel introduce themselves, and we'll just go down the panel. Go ahead, if you want to just introduce yourself and which organization you represent.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Michaud, and I'm President and CEO of BioCanRx. We are a federally incorporated not-for-profit, and we invest in the development of immunotherapies for the clinic. And I look forward to explaining more of what we do in the 7 minutes I have.
Good morning, Andrew Casey, President and CEO of Biotech Canada. We're the National Association for Canada's biotech industry. Our members extend from coast to coast, 236 or so members, including the large multinational pharma, but most of them are the early stage companies that are taking innovation out of our research centers and universities and trying to commercialize them.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? I'm Nimi. No? Good morning. Oh. Now you can hear me. So I'm Namir Anani, President and CEO of the Information and Communications Technology Council. We're a national center of expertise for the digital economy with the aim of advancing Canada's digital advantage in a global context. So we do that through the research, the policy, and the capacity building. We help companies, but we help Canadians acquire the skills for today and tomorrow. And we're national in nature and spread out across the country. And we do some international work, and we reach out to thousands of industry members in the digital economy.
Hello, I'm Karen Churchill. I'm the CEO of AgWest Bio. AgWest Bio is Saskatchewan's Ag Bioscience Industry Association, and we have a mandate to move innovation to commercialization in the province.
Yes, and good morning, everyone. Not by design, I'm also from Saskatchewan. My name's Al Shep. I'm the Executive Director of the IMII. We are a Minerals Innovation Supporting Network for Saskatchewan's minerals industry, so very much focused on the province of Saskatchewan and its world-leading potash and uranium sectors. I guess I'll briefly say IMI is unique. We think in the resources sector, mineral sector particularly, that we're foster innovations not only from a technology side of life, but from a workforce development side of life. So we support innovation, education, and training, as well as research and development, technology demonstration.
And Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. I'm Dave Waters. Good morning. I'm the founder of the Institute of Collaborative Innovation based here in Ottawa, and also a strategic advisor to the Global Advantage Consulting Group, and very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just before we get started, I want to recognize the sponsors of this symposium, and that's BioCanRx. Stephanie, thank you very much. And PEI BioAlliance. So we thank the sponsors very much for sponsoring this symposium. Now, so what we're going to do here for the next hour and a bit is each panelist is going to have about 7 minutes. And what we're looking for from the panelists is their reactions to what Omar and Dave presented and what Tadevik and I presented. So carrying on the conversation that we sort of had at the end of the first session, we want the panelists to provide some insights and some critique and some reaction. And so Stephanie, since you're first in the table, I'm going to let you go ahead.
All right, perfect. Great. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And I really very much appreciated the questions that were posed, in particular by the audience. And those are the ones that I want to focus on at the beginning of my remarks. The first is actually from Rory. And, the observation that you've made with respect to boiling down and oversimplifying what the issues are by grouping them, by lumping, I think is the word that you use, all together. I agree with you 100%. I think that in particular in the area of drug development, biotech, life science in Canada, the system that we need to plug into in order to advance an asset from invention all the way to a commercialized product are extremely complex. And to quote some individuals at ISED, health is hard. It is. It's hard. There are a lot of different moving pieces. So I agree with that. That the lumping is an oversimplification, and I appreciate the efforts to be specific when it comes to developing strategies to address the gaps that we have in health. And I'll be using precise examples from what we have seen at BioCanRx, because I do consider us, although I again, quoting Rory, that perhaps we are an innovation intermediary. And I'll use also another phrase to couch my examples from health, and specifically health research, which is a desired state of the health research that we fund in Canada is that we achieve a state of learning health systems where we are able to implement new ideas, new technologies into our healthcare system and learn from that. I would argue that the same is needed, that we need an innovation learning system. And what I'm struck by with respect to the reports that have been generated, the conversation here, is in effect how very little learning is happening and very little adjustment is happening. And I'll use a specific example from what we see at BioCanRx. So as I've mentioned, we're not-for-profit. We invest in the development of immunotherapies for the clinic. And what does that mean? It means that we don't invest in early stage research, we invest in development. And then because of the nature of health research, we then invest in research again. And what do I mean by that? Clinical trials. CIHR wishes to invest in clinical trials, and through the biomanufacturing and life science strategy, they obtained $250 million to invest in clinical trials, which is fantastic. BioCanRx also invests in clinical trials. What we have seen, and we have results because we have numbers, because we interact with the academic community, we interact with industry, is the absolute need for what I call the meat of the sandwich in drug development, which is taking an asset from proof of concept, preclinical, which is all of the information that you need to go knock on the door of Health Canada to be able to submit a clinical trial application. That middle part, which is absolutely essential, is not funded in Canada, and I would argue is one of the reasons why BioCanRx has done really well in the ecosystem with a little amount of money, addressing very specific structural issues, which I can get into later, and really increasing the number of clinical trials that are based on Canadian innovation that, by the way, we know the patients that we work with want some of that citizen-driven need for innovation. What we have found is that of the clinical trials over the past 20 years that have been executed in Canada in the area of cancer immunotherapies, there have been a lot because we are a destination for clinical trials in Canada. So I disagree with the issues with respect to we have issues with our regulatory system with clinical trials. I don't think that we do. I think Health Canada actually works really well. I think we have other regulatory issues having to do with adoption, having to do with reimbursement, which in turn translates into risk for the companies that are developing those technologies because they don't know when they're going to be reimbursed and if they're going to be reimbursed. But that is another part of that regulatory system. What we found is that over the past 20 years, we have had about 700 clinical trials in Canada. And the number of those that are based on Canadian innovation is exceedingly small. How small? About 30 or 4%. And it's not because we don't have the publications on the great ideas, because as Dave Waters have shown, we invest a lot in the R. What we don't do is the D. And in the case of health research, we need to invest in the D in order to continue the path of research. And clinical trials are research. In the area in which we invest, the pace of research is moving so quickly that being able to translate a new invention to the clinic, towards a clinical trial, is a way for patients in Canada, cancer patients that we work with, to access novel technologies. It's really important, very important for them to be able to do so. And it's also a great way of demonstrating value to the Canadian taxpayer of what their research dollars are doing. So out of those 30 clinical trials over the past 20 years that have been developed based on Canadian innovation, we've only been around since 2015. About 40% of those were as a result of our activities. I'm proud of that, of course, but I'm also a little bit disappointed in that this is all that we've been able to achieve so far, and there's so much work to do. And this, by the way, we did with an investment from the federal government of not hundreds of millions of dollars, but 40 million. And we've built an engine of translation that works and works really well to address structural issues that exist in the ecosystem and rearranges the way that the funding flows and addresses specific gaps to collaborate and to encourage, and I'm even going to use the word force, collaboration between certain institutions in Canada to work together, where we're actually able to say, you will work with that group or you will work with this core facility because we know that they do really good work. And our aim at BioCanRx is to make things go fast because we have patients that are waiting. So being able to respond to that need of patients and also of the companies that we work with who acknowledge that we're able to make things go quite quickly is of immense value to the ecosystem. And we've been able to take that $40 million investment that occurred in 2015 and turn it into about $110 million of partner investment. This is not due to an extraordinarily innovative program, but it is based on very practical steps addressing what is needed in order to advance an asset from A to B and addressing some of those structural issues.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. Andrew, do you want to take over?
It's not a choice, right?
No.
Well, thank you. I was just, as I listened to Stephanie talking, some of the continuum, the same thing that we face. I've been at this job for 12 years, not as long as my colleague Rory from PEI, but long enough that I've seen a lot of these tables, these discussions that he alluded to earlier on. I think many of the reports that we've seen on this subject matter are sitting right next to the Ark of the Covenant in the back of that warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Something changed, obviously, for our industry in 2019, 2020. And you now have government in Canada, and we're not unique in this way, but the Canadian government and at both the federal and provincial levels, recognizing that they don't want to be back in the situation of trying to build an airplane and fly it at the same time. And so as a result of that, they're trying to get prepared for, and I think wisely so, but prepared for COVID-50, COVID-60. You can pick your year, and I'll be generous and call it COVID, but who knows what it's going to be. So we don't know what the next challenge is going to be. We certainly have no idea what the next solution is going to be. So we're now in a position to sort of prepare for something that we don't know what it is. And so how can we predict what we need to solve for it? And rather than trying to figure out what the next horse is that's going to win that race, I think governments are doing the smart thing, which is to sort of build up a life sciences sector and a corresponding biomanufacturing sector in this country, and investing fairly heavily. And we're seeing it both at the federal level, but also sort of complementary ones at the provincial levels as well. And thankfully, they're not building on sort of ground zero. We have, as was talked about earlier, I think a very robust ecosystem here that's generating all sorts of fantastic research, which is creating companies. And we've seen a lot of companies sort of achieve success over the past couple of years, but more certainly needs to be done. And I think the work that the governments are doing to sort of invigorate the ecosystem is going to be really important and sort of drive some of that forward. But it's also going to require industry in and of itself. And so when I think about the reports that were talked about, a couple of things stood out for me. Recognizing some of the challenges that we as a sector are facing right now. The first one is talent. Of course, we need people to drive innovation forward. No matter how smart you are, no matter how good your innovation, your IP is, if you don't have the right people to take that idea forward, it's impossible to do. And the second part is the investment dollars that are required to actually finance the operation. That's always been a challenge for the sector, but even more so now. And the third one is the regulatory piece. And I think it's important to understand, and I talked a bit about this at the outset, but Canada is very smart. We recognize that we don't want to be back in that situation, which is great. But pretty much every other jurisdiction around the world has recognized the exact same thing. So what we're in now is a highly competitive space. And other countries, other jurisdictions are more than willing to take our innovations, our talent, and our investment. All of them are like tourists. So if you think of talent and investment, they are traveling the world. They're going to go to where they feel the most welcome, the most rewarded. As a country, we have to almost think of ourselves like a hotel. And what do hotels do when they want you to stay there? Well, they give you comfy pillows, nice comfy bathrobes, free Wi-Fi, free breakfast, whatever it is to entice you to stay at that hotel. And Canada has to do likewise if we're going to sort of keep the innovation that we're creating here and grow it and actually become companies. And so what are the pieces that we need to sort of use to entice those tourists to stay here and come here? What's the chocolate on the pillow? Well, that's where you move into the regulatory piece to make sure that our regulatory system is advanced and modern as possible. We have lagged in certain areas for sure. But I think generally speaking, the experience that we saw with Health Canada during the pandemic shows us that we actually can be a very effective regulator, and not to the point of looking for corners to be cut, because I think there's a competitive advantage to going through a very strenuous regulatory exercise here in Canada. But we can be more efficient. We can work with other jurisdictions and other nations to make sure that our regulatory system is as competitive as possible. The other chocolate on the pillow might be our tax policy. So the SR&ED tax credits, what are they looking like? Are they as competitive as possible? The challenge that we've got is if we're not attracting the tourists, the investment tourists and the talent tourists, we are unlike any other industry in this country, pretty much every other industry in this country. If you take mining, oil and gas, forest products, any one of those other big industries, they too have to attract investment and the talent. If they are unable to do so, you can't pack up the mine and move it to Texas. In this sector, what you're dealing with is IP. That's your company. And if you're not attracting the talent and the investment to Canada, that IP will go elsewhere. Ultimately, we'll get the finished product back if it is successful. And that's great, but we will have missed out on all the commercial benefits of sort of developing that company here. And then the other challenge that we've got is that once you've got all those pieces in place, there's a version of when do we know we're there, which is a question you can answer when you've got two kids in the back seat and you're going to grandma's house. But in this space, it's a little bit different. I don't know when you actually have arrived at the finish line. And I think one of the things we've done a very lousy job of in this country is we've taken great ideas, great science, created very good companies, and grown them to a certain point, and then they're gone. And that was talked a bit about this morning. Now, in fairness, there are two business models. For some companies, that's what makes the most commercial success, is you take your product to a certain point, it's too expensive to go further, and it makes no sense because you don't have the global reach to do it. Maybe the multinational companies do. So you sell that product. So that's a perfectly good, viable business model. In fact, it's healthy because a lot of that investment dollar comes back into the country and starts new companies. But what we have not yet done in this country is create anchor companies. And anchor companies are what sort of drive an ecosystem and make for a healthy ecosystem. And that's where we have to sort of be looking to get to. And if you think about, as an example, all of you are now familiar with Ozempic, which is a product of Novo Nordisk. And Novo Nordisk's market cap right now exceeds the GDP of Denmark. I would argue that might be a nice problem to have in certain circumstances, but I'll let the Danes deal with that. But what the Novo Nordisk examples for me is, if you think about the history of Novo Nordisk, it is founded on insulin, which is, of course, a Canadian innovation. And the question I have today when we think about what we're trying to address with some of the challenges we got is, if Banting and Best discovered insulin today, would we have Canada Disc in 105 years? And that's what we have to be striving for, because it's that anchor company that's going to actually create the ecosystems that are going to be healthier. They're going to lead to more companies and more growth and attract the investment and talent. It self-perpetuates, and that's where we need to get to. And I think if we can address some of these challenges as identified in the report, we're going to sort of make our way there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Dave, you're up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just a fascinating discussion. One of the senses I get, again, is the issue of fragmentation of interests. My two colleagues have given an excellent description in terms of the challenges facing their individual areas, which is exactly what we want. But for me, the issue then is how do you translate that into action? And to me, the control levers in terms of spending tax regulatory issues are governments. And so if you keep approaching government on an individual basis, I don't think you're going to get very far. You've got to have a collective approach in terms of approaching government. And the question is, can we do that? Can we organize ourselves? Do we share enough of a common interest in some issues that we will get together in terms of approaching government? That's on the assumption that what we're trying to do is to improve the performance of our science, technology, and innovation ecosystem. But if that is the common objective that we share, we get into the issue then of how are we going to work together to try and do that. And that's the issue that I found fascinating in terms of a number of the questions that were raised. In part, there's a dual issue. One is substance and the other is relationships. In my own view, as I've tried to use with various organizations I've been with, if you don't get the relationships right, you're probably never going to get the substance right. So how do we build those connecting points among the various independent issues and concerns we have towards a common objective that we share? And in terms of the Institute of Collaborative Innovation with, in particular, my colleagues, Robert Walker and Dan Wayner, we're trying to explore some of these issues. And again, also including a youth group. So we have several young employees, and we're connected with Carleton University in terms of some student projects and with Algonquin to try and explore these issues. Because I think that perspective, how to work together to overcome the improvements that we need in the science, technology, and innovation system, need that all hands on deck kind of approach. One of the things that I find a little bit disappointing, and maybe to make the analogy to an orchestra, let's say the orchestra isn't performing well, and someone says, oh, well, we need a new instrument. If we just had this new instrument, I bet things would be really great. And the analogy of course, well, let's create a new organization. And we constantly seem to do that. And maybe the issue isn't, a new organization in terms of being helpful. It's managing better what we have. And I actually think that is a huge problem that I see, and that we should focus some attention on those kinds of issues. Now those kinds of issues aren't your, quote, pure science kind of issues. They're really in the domain of social sciences, which I think are underrepresented in terms of the contribution that needs to be made to trying to solve a variety of these issues. I really enjoyed your issue in terms of the SR&ED tax credit, which is being reviewed right now by the Department of Finance. And one of the interesting issues, no investment in social R&D is acceptable under SR&ED. None, zero, okay? Well, why is that? I don't get that. So the closer I actually get in terms of my research to getting something into a market that people can use, and the less ability I have to be able to get some kind of a tax credit in terms of it, it's just like, I don't understand that. And I hope people in this audience have made representations on those kinds of issues. One of the things that may be important in terms of trying to find a collective approach we can agree on is to maybe focus on scenario planning. And it's the difference between a specific destination that you want to go to, which is incredibly difficult to get agreement to, but can we agree on a general space that we feel comfortable with in terms of making improvements in the STI ecosystem? I mean, it was interesting. Gordon McBean reminded us of the top 4 risks that are identified in terms of the World Economic Forum are all in the environmental area. To me, that's one component we need to deal with on a mandatory basis. The second is the lack of social cohesion in our society. It's just dissipating. The lack of trust. We're living in an era of the Tower of Babel. Can't communicate effectively anymore. Terms don't mean the same things to various groups. And if you just look at sort of a matrix structure with those components. Is there an area, do we want higher social cohesion? Do we want to be able to address the energy transition in a fair way? And what would it take to try and move roughly in that direction, with bearing in mind absolutely the key kind of component that you're focused on producing benefits for all citizens. So, yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Namir.
Morning. I hope you can hear me well this time. Excellent. Well, certainly delighted to be here to exchange on the subject of innovation, being the cornerstone that helps advance Canada's economy and society. I think if you take the notion of social innovation in a global context. Bonjour à toutes et tous, je suis ravi de vous retrouver aujourd'hui, d'avoir l'opportunité d'échanger sur ce sujet. I think it's fair to say that innovation is the foundation and the essence of any high-performing economy, specifically as we navigate some of the global challenges that are facing our economy, from climate change to geopolitical inflictions and trade dynamics. I think trade is an important aspect that we have to reflect on, cyber threats, health risks, and labor market shifts. And all of these come against the backdrop of digital technologies or advanced digital technologies that frankly disrupting industries faster than economies can adjust. Just look at AI and its impact on, you take it from genomics to molecular modeling, right to advanced manufacturing and e-commerce to everything else, transportation and everything, all the different aspects. What's interesting, while I certainly agree with a lot what was presented, and as an organization that, dialogues and consults a lot of our association, there's a lot of elements in what you presented that align with the thinking that's happening, whether it's on the talent, whether it's on smart regulation, access to capital and financing, and trade as well on this. But I would like to maybe limit my discussion on 3 points, relevant or adjacent and relevant to some of the discussions that were raised, and look forward to any questions and dialogue on that. The first one is that we know clearly that innovation thrives in a strong industrial setting, an industrial setting that has an ecosystem for research and development, that has the partnerships and suppliers, that has the markets in national and international settings, and has the talent capabilities as well. In fact, that's what made Germany a very strong economy in Industry 4.0 and moving to Industry 5.0 with the automation and robotics. That's what made South Korea and the automotive industries, but the consumer electronics and ICT. And that's what made Switzerland, which is a small economy of 8 million individuals, people that don't have, ironically, resources like we do, but made them very strong into the chemical and pharmaceutical industry, but also the consumer electronics, and financial technologies and precision engineering on that. But where does that take us? I think ultimately, we as an economy, whether we decide that we want to advance clean energy or renewable or life sciences or others, we have to have an intentional industrial strategy to create that cluster, to be able not to only send the messages and look for where do we put our investment in, but also send a message to international organizations and international economies that that's what we excel in, whether it's AI development or clean energy or others that I mentioned. In the absence of that, I think we send a fragmented message to the rest of the world, and it's difficult to attract investments, but also attract innovation and innovation capital into Canada. The second is one that is often overlooked a little bit. It's a role of competition in Canada. Competition is so vital to be able to drive more innovation into products and services that help our commercialization deficit, and specifically in an environment where more tariffs are going to be introduced and more strict restrictions on commercialization aspect. But also competition helps drive productivity improvement across the country. It's something that we have to reflect on. We as a nation, in fact, as an economy, having worked at the highest level at the CRTC, which is the regulatory authority for the communications telecom, we're still one of the countries that have the most restrictive foreign ownership rules on the telecom industry. So it's not easy to allow entrants into Canada to compete. I travel to Europe, I travel to other countries. The pricing, affordability, and connectivity is much higher to do that. I think we have to come to these realities to be able to advance the innovation agenda into Canada. Last but not least is how do we entice business investment in research and development? I was interested to see from Omer and David that it's true that our percentage of investment of R&D compared to GDP is around 1.6, 1.7, compared to the average of the OECD that sits at 2.7. Compare that to some of the countries that are very advanced, was mentioned South Korea and Israel are at the 4 to 4.5 or 5% of their investment into GDP. However, that R&D intensity, they call it, is a combination of both government and private industry. And while it's clear that government, whether it's federal or provincial, should increase investment in R&D, I think we have to find better ways of enticing the industry to use their retained incomes and invest it into R&D. At the moment, specifically the fact that the large majority of Canada's industry is micro and small medium enterprises, their retained income is used for survival mode, as to how to meet today's environment and how to make sure that they are sustainable in the long run. Many countries like Germany and others have found ways of providing some taxation relief for retained income to use for R&D, but with the guardrails. It's not just for R&D development, but R&D development with commercialization. Last, and I will stop at that, is I think the trade aspect is incredibly important, specifically what could come up in the south of the border. A lot of our exports, 75% of Canada's exports is with the United States. I think we have to expand our trade net and look abroad. Europe is a good example. We've developed several years ago the Comprehensive European Trade Agreement to an economy of 450 million, $17.5 trillion economy compared to 1.7 or 1.9 Canada. So it's multitude of our economy with lower or no trade or trade barriers at all. We have to start thinking of where do we diversify, because commercialization has a big impact on our innovation capital in Canada. I'll stop here and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Amir. Go ahead, Karen.
Thanks. So in preparing for this, I now have just tossed all my notes because I think everything has already been said to some extent, and I agree wholeheartedly. AgWest, I said, has a mandate to move innovation to commercialization, and we're 30 years old. So this discussion has been happening in some form for a long, long time, longer than 30 years, I'm sure. And my organization has a fairly broad perspective, which you need, because we also manage a innovation cluster. So we're involved in the research side. We work heavily with SMEs, so we understand their pain. And to Dana's point, they are unique. And we also have been charged with being the ambassadors to biosciences and to the public, which is way too broad of a mandate. It is impossible for one organization to do all those things. But to David's point, we need a whole of government approach. And we need to stop making these plans and never implementing them. And I can't answer to how we will ever get to that stage where we're doing a lot more walking and a lot less talking. But we need to invest across. There is no point in putting more money in research, more money in development without really looking at the regulatory piece. I have to double down on it because it is such an impediment to our SMEs. Yes, they need more cash. And yes, they need it de-risked. They'd need less if it didn't take so long to get to commercialization. It is a struggle, a very huge struggle. And the other thing I see with, saying we need to collaborate and the importance of private and public partnerships, well, what I find in my real life tactical on the ground experience is that they're not true partnerships. What happens is the government says, it's our money, we're driving the bus. You can put your ideas on the bus, but we're driving. And it doesn't really work. They're great partnerships, they're great ideas, but at the same time, you have to agree on the goals and the outcomes. It is industry who needs to uptake this. And the other thing I'd like to say is we also don't have to keep looking. I'm a huge believer, as Rory said, in that we can't keep going top down. There is huge regional differences, huge regional ideas. And I think if we look at a global strategy and who else is around the world is implementing effective innovation strategies, there's some great ideas out there. And I personally, in our organization, have been looking to Australia because it's got a similar population density and have taken a very visionary approach to this, recognizing that the regions are different and that to some extent, a small country like ourselves, we've lost a little bit in the research race. A lot, let's be honest. And some of the really great research ideas are not homegrown. We need to be able to implement what's going on in the United States, in China here. And it's not all paying for big battery factories, right? It's the innovation itself and bringing that IP to Canadian companies. So great ideas on those innovation sandboxes and infrastructure to support bringing the ideas here to our companies. I think the other thing I want to add about, tax credits and SMEs is they're not revenue generating. So a tax credit is really not all that valuable. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Karen. Go ahead, Al.
Right. Well, good morning again, everyone, and thanks for letting me be here. I'm going to try and make sense. I'm saying that because winter arrived in Saskatchewan yesterday. I arrived at 2 a.m. And I had an 8 a.m. meeting. So I've tried to gather my thoughts. And just one quick reaction, I have to do it because it's something, I've been involved with the minerals industry for more than 30 years now in a variety of capacities in the last several innovation group. And one thing I hope I make a case for today is that when we look at the idea of anchors, and I think anchors, corporations are very important from an innovation ecosystem perspective, they're not just manufacturing anchors. I want to make the case that mines and mills are anchors. We draw investment and we can bring innovation out of academic communities, out of research institutions, out of the solution providers, but we get very little recognition as a resource sector as an anchor. There's a lot of focus on gigafactories, not on the material front that needs to go in the front of that. So hopefully I'll remember to make that case because perhaps you can't pack up and move a mine after you build the mine. And these are multi-billion-dollar investments. But you can, before you build it, you can take your capital elsewhere. And the industry does. If it can take 10 to 15 years to get a mine approved in Canada, and you can do it for 2 years in other jurisdictions, including the United States, I'm not talking about jurisdictions with no environmental rules and no health and safety standards. The money can move, and the money does significantly move. And we live in a world where if, and my 8 o'clock meetings twisted me on this, if we're going to continue down the path toward decarbonization, we need nothing but more minerals. There's no pathway to decarbonization without many more minerals. And if you have a target to do something by 2035, and if we don't have the mine built today, it might not be approved by 2035, and it won't be part of the solution. So for me, I want to say that's one of the drivers to maybe broaden our sense of anchors and the importance of the resource sector in all this. Also want to say from my time in innovation, I just want to say, Canada has an innovation productivity problem. That's not unique, but it's more of, I want to, and hopefully also make the case, but it's been going on for more than 20 years. And from my understanding of innovation, if something's not worked for 20 years, it's a prime candidate for innovation. So I want us collectively turn our mind to fixing what's not working. Right? Business investment has not turned around. Public investment has not turned around. We need to do some things different. What we're trying to do different in IMI is we're trying to create that innovation ecosystem model with the corporations as anchors and solution providers in the center. And we reach out to academics and research institutions and others to try and bring innovations forward with that focus, not just in R&D. We are very much focused on research, development, demonstration, and deployment. Because it's not an innovation if it's not put into use. And big companies are some of the people who can put it into use. We can demand things be brought forward to us and put into use. And that's one reason why IMI was created about 10 years ago, to help bring focus to innovation for the minerals industry and bring focus on innovation for education and training. Because I also, very much appreciate the report, very much appreciate that we all share these labor market challenges, but those challenges are so real. We need new pathways and we need new partners. And that's not a knock against any existing post-secondary institution, because they are my members as well. I give full credit to our University of Saskatchewan, University of Regina, the Polytechnic, our regional colleges, Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies. We're all trying to work together on improving training and employment, but it can't keep doing what we're doing, demanding people come to large centers, sit in a classroom from 9 to 5. In the case that when we look to solutions in workforce and training and employment, we need to find solutions that can go out to rural, remote, reserve communities, because there just aren't enough, from our perspective, enough young people in cities who want to come work in the minerals industry. So we need to create some new things there. Quick comment on regulatory challenge. Just want to say there are models out there. If there's any government authorities in the room, look at the European Union on their critical materials. They basically have said, EU to national governments, we need critical materials, fix your regulatory system. It should take no more than 2 years to get approval for things. And not 10 to 15. So there are models out there. And those are, I think, challenges for us. And for other things, again, I'm interested in I think it's an old Conference Board of Canada study that suggested, we should do more from an innovation ecosystem, take advantage of the natural advantages we have. And yes, I'm biased because I've been in the mineral sector for a long time. But we can play a significant role as anchors, as promoters of innovation, if we fix some of the other challenges, and we can take advantage, because it's more likely, it's what I say to all my academic partners, if you come up with an invention that could be deployed in the minerals industry in Saskatchewan, given the international nature of the industry, if we make it work in Saskatchewan, it can go across the country, it can go across the world. We can be a place where innovation can start, and then it can spread out around the world. And we really, hopefully I'll make my last point here, we need innovation in the decarbonization space. I got beaten up this morning for quoting McKinsey and Company, so I don't know if they're in the room. But in the last year, they said only 10% of the technologies we need for decarbonization around the world are actually commercially competitively available. 10%. 45% are not still in the pilot and labs. And yet we've got these incredible targets to decarbonize, and you can't do it without technology being commercially available. Like we have to find somewhere to get there, and that should be part, if we're talking about industrial strategy at some point, for me, that has to be part of it.
Great, thanks, Al. So before I turn it over to the audience, I'm going to put the panel on a spot. We did not plan this question, but I think it's important because it didn't come up in the consultation sessions. Dave and Omar kind of touched on it, and a couple of you touched on it. I'm curious to know what the panel thinks about the geopolitical uncertainty that we live in this moment, and how that's going to impact how we move forward in trying to make sense of an innovation strategy and how we develop an innovation strategy. So I'll just let anybody in the panel jump in. Where do we sit with terms of the massive geopolitical uncertainty that we're facing right now?
Happy to jump in. I mean, that lends itself to what I mentioned earlier. I think any potential increase in tariffs towards Canada, specifically that Canada, as it deals, 75% of our exports is to the United States. that will have an impact on our commercialization. And commercialization has a strong correlation with the innovation agenda, because ultimately it's what drives the funding for further research and development and further improvements and products and services to go along. And that's, I think, where we have to think strategically of where are other opportunities that we need to expand on. And I mentioned Europe and other countries that potentially we have to reflect on. But that's a reality that we're facing. 75% of exports, specifically in an environment where our commercialization deficit or trade deficit is high, meaning that we import more than we export, we need to figure that one out going forward.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Sure. It feels, without trying to solve for all of it, but it certainly feels like a huge opportunity as well. If I think about what the magic is for our industry, it's the investment, it's the talent, it's the idea. They all want to be where they feel safe and secure. And so if you're a country like Canada and you're looking to attract all of that, that kind of makes sense to go away from those places that are just not offering you that safety and security. It also strikes me that all of that strife and everything else that is going on is going to create more challenges, which requires more innovation. So it feels, if you try and look at the glass half full, it feels like there's an enormous opportunity there for us.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, the geopolitical tensions that seem to be increasing that we see may be the tip of an iceberg. And to me, it links into how do you define geopolitical in terms of the risks that are out there. There are narrow ways and broader ways of looking at that. I think this issue about the lack of social cohesion that is taking place, the questioning of institutions, questioning of democracy, is a trend that will continue. Already, it's resulted in restructuring of supply chains, of looking at national interest first. And that kind of progression, I think, is going to continue. So to pick up on a couple of comments made here and that Rory had started about, I think you need to find solutions then at a local level. So I think you'll find that the world liberalism and so on, I think, is diminishing and decreasing, and the value of those institutions, unfortunately, and that we're progressing into looking at solutions at a much more regional and local level. But if that's the case, let's monitor that, but let's also look at, well, how can we collaborate then at that local level to try and meet the needs of local citizens effectively? So, there's a colleague in the audience who was just kind of making a comment. But in terms of those local institutions, so to me, you look at universities and colleges who have that local kind of footprint. There are various federal programs that are locally sort of distributed. You've got the IRAP officers all across the country. There's a funding that gives something like 260 communities across the country, structure in terms of small business development. You can change that in terms of focusing on innovation. What are the needs? This issue that Remy Caron has started in terms of putting a chief scientist in municipalities. These are the decentralizing things, which I think are great. Let's look at trying to expand that. So I think the mechanisms and structures in terms of what's happening are there to reassess and reevaluate in terms of meeting some of the different ways of improving our system, but doing it at a local level.
Thanks. Stephanie, go ahead.
So I agree with my colleague with respect to the need and the potential opportunity for Canada to be a place of regulatory certainty, especially with respect to the unknowns of who is going to be appointed to lead key files in the U.S., especially as it relates to, for example, regulatory agency like the FDA. And our industries are looking for this regulatory certainty. So that's excellent. I couldn't agree more. At the same time, I think, and I think everybody in this room feels the same way, it's really time to get our house in order And I was very pleased to see that Dave mentioned in his presentation the the economic strategy tables. And in preparing for this panel, of course, I had gone back to this. I was hoping Karima would be here to perhaps give us an update on the economic strategy table that she was responsible for. And I was looking forward to a report on how we're doing and whether or not we've hit our targets that we've set, which, by the way, were for 2025. In this document, Canada placed 9th out of 11 peer countries according to the 2017, this was a while ago, Commonwealth Fund ranking of healthcare system performance. And we were aiming for a top 5 spot in 2025. And I'm here to tell you that the number has not changed. So with respect to the global and geopolitical uncertainty, do we really need a new strategy, or do we already have the map and we simply need to pivot and get busy with adapting to what the reality is? Okay, thanks.
Al, go ahead.
Yeah, I think probably 4 points. One, the American election, we're very much, as a minerals industry, I think, looking to see what that will do, because the Inflation Reduction Act pulled investment money and people out of Canada and the United States. So uncertainty, if that's going to come to an end, what that might mean, we're not sure about yet. But I think from a critical minerals perspective, that probably will continue. The driver for the West, if I can say that, around critical minerals is with respect to the dominance of China. I don't think that's changing. I think that's still going to be out there, and we're going to have to figure out a way to address, again, China's dominance in that market. Another thing for us on the minerals front that's not going to change is there are 2 fundamental drivers that, irrespective of politics, are still out there. That's world population growth and urbanization. Those in their own case are creating demand. Like, we are on our way to 10 billion people by 2050, and that will do nothing but create the need for, in our perspective, something like more potash. But urbanization is just creating the need for more and more minerals and metals. And the world will, we're all, I don't know how long we've been urbanizing, but hundreds of years, whatever you want to pick for when we started moving into the cities, that's going to continue. And you can't have mega cities without more and more and more and more minerals and metals. So that's, those drivers, irrespective of politics, are still going to be there for us.
Karen, did you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think to bring it back a little bit to the political, we do a lot of tutting about the U.S. Ooh, how could they do this? How could they appoint Robert F. Kennedy to those critical files? And I think we need to bring our own house in order. I think we are not recognizing that ship already sailed in Canada. We just did it more quietly. Nobody really raised the alarm. And now we're at a zero risk principle where we're at putting policies ahead of economic growth and not addressing our costs of production. So yes, population will be a driver, but we don't have the structure in place to make sure that our whole innovation system is fixed and keeping our costs of production so that we are a viable trade partner. People need what we want, but they won't pay what we're asking. So it's just one more thought.
Great. So we've got about 34 minutes to go in this session. I'm going to open it up. There's mics set up here on this side of the room, and this side of the room, if people just want to get up to the mic and get in line, and we can open up the discussion again. And it's Sandra, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So thanks for this. This was really interesting and instructive. And so I was really interested in the question that was asked to all of you about the global impact or the impact of current events outside of Canada on our innovation ecosystem. And what was interesting was the type of answers that we got. So there was like, oh, trade's going to be affected. We need to watch out for this. And then there were the questions about, well, wait, let's take a look at how we're doing things here. And so there's something about when we ask questions about innovation, we're often sort of just jumping to, okay, we're talking about mechanisms for economic growth. And of course, the international scene is going to affect that quite directly. But as you were saying, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name, right at the end, most of the problems that we need to tackle to increase the impact of our innovation ecosystem are sort of like in our kitchen. We need to fix that. And, whatever happens outside of Canada. But if we don't tackle the gaps, and there's gaps in fundings, there's gaps in regulation, but there's also gaps in connectivity, there's gaps in trust. And so we have to resist this temptation to always sort of think of the innovation ecosystem as this sort of generalized entity that we can talk about using universal statements. That's not the case. So I think it's interesting to emphasize how important it is to think about innovation on its own. Yes, sure, it also includes the use of innovation to create growth economically, to create prosperity. But what that in itself is very complex and needs to be supported. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
Thank you. Marc Nantel, Niagara College again. Because it was brought up, and then it continued being brought up, this concept of a sandbox in which industry could come and play with technology. I have to say it already exists. It's called the Technology Access Centers. It's in cégeps and colleges across Canada. There are 67 of them. If you want to learn more about them, they're in various sectors. At Niagara College, we have one in food and beverage innovation and in advanced manufacturing innovation. You can go to Tech Access Canada. Just Google them. You'll find the website. I think it's .ca. And it's a place where companies can come and try technology, either through a fee-for-service model, where if they need it yesterday, they can bloody pay for the whole thing. Or if it's a larger project that may involve development of a product or process or service, then the government co-funds. And to address Namir's point about getting BIRD to go up, the business expenditure in research and innovation, every project we do at Niagara College, where we bring in $1 from the government, regardless of the source, industry has to put $1 towards it. Now, it's not all cash. It's a mix of cash and in kind, but at Niagara College, we make sure it's at least 20% cash of the whole project, or is got to be industry cash. And then there's the in-kind. It can be consumables or whatnot, but it's important that they contribute. And in our small little way, maybe we're increasing the BIRD, although the different definitions of BIRDs, and sometimes BIRD is defined as business expenditure at the company. But anyway, we're trying to do our best. So there you go. Go and find your sandbox near you. Thanks.
That's an excellent model to use. Yeah.
I comment, our group is a big supporter of a TAC out of Saskatchewan Polytechnic, and our work with our university's Polytechnic have shown us that we still need a physical sandbox. It's one thing to have a digital sandbox. We need a physical sandbox to help get things out of the university labs, into the applied research and demonstration with the Polytechnic, but into somewhere physical where we can actually test it out. We don't have that. There's only one, quote, test mine in all of Canada that's available. BC wants one. I think we'd be interested in one. Challenge for us is that physical sandbox costs a huge amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars probably to get to, but could be really value add.
Anyone else in the panel want to respond? Okay, go ahead.
Bob Walker again. I fear there's an elephant in the room that has not come up in today's discussion. And that is the system of government in Canada, which I would argue is the most complex system of democracy in the world. We have 4 levels of government. We do not have a national government. We have a federal government, provincial governments, municipal governments, indigenous governments. And we do not have a shared ideology across those political levels, if you like, as to how to work together to drive the collective good for our citizens. I think this is an enormous problem. Dave, you've eloquently spoke. Sandra, you've eloquently spoken to the importance of the social sciences. In the social sciences, there's a special one called political science. We need that because, in fact, finding the way to have Canadian federalism to move from confrontational federalism to cooperative federalism surely has to be a path we're trying to move down. So when we use the word government, We need to replace it with the reality is what we're talking about is politicians, and politicians at multiple levels. And how do we find a common space where we can actually get politicians to collectively commit to help set the conditions that meet the interests of our citizens, enabled by the industry sector as its wealth generation capacity? Thank you.
Any comments from the panel?
I'll jump in there because I've been in the political side of things and certainly what we deal with. What was it, Churchill that said it's the worst form of government except it's better than all the others? So a version of that, right? And I wonder, like, how much can we fix of that? Or are we better off just recognizing that's what we've got? And can it get better? Yeah, sure, it can get better. But it's amazing what we've already done to this point with that government that's in place. And the politics aside, I think where there are other issues that are probably more pressing than trying to fix the macro political environment. And Stephanie alluded to earlier, but if you take clinical trials as a great example, we used to be one of the best jurisdictions in the world for doing clinical trials. We've lost our position, and notably Australia, which was mentioned earlier, has jumped to the forefront. Well, how did that happen? They made it really easy to do. So instead of going through 10 ethics boards and all sorts of different ways to apply, they just had one portal. You come on in through this portal and you got the whole patient population at your disposal. That's the stuff I think we can solve well before we're ever going to solve politics in Canada and opening up the Constitution and all the rest of the stuff that comes with it.
I think we're going to go to this side of the room now for the next question.
Sure. My name is Matt Price Gallagher. Again, I come from the industry side, being the entrepreneur. And the two things that I see that are problems are, one is it's been mentioned here, the translation of research invention into innovation. And in my experience, the technology transfer office is a real problem, especially when you're dealing with new technologies, deep tech that involves cross-disciplinary fields, usually involves many different universities. There has to be, I think, a discussion around a universal tech transfer model or agreement, as well as leaving some flexibility there, openness to have that joined with other universities. I had a very interesting discussion with the U15 group over the break, and they understand this is an issue. So that's from my standpoint where I see the problem is. And we left Canada after 3 or 4 years and moved everything to Israel, completely different. And that opened up everything. The second one is we're talking about industry and small, medium-sized business in terms of adoption, technology adoption. Well, we have so many RTOs, research technology organizations, provincially, federally. Why can't we operate like Fraunhofer or Caterpillar? Can we learn lessons from them that can target, as Dan Bresnitz calls these tech teams? These companies that are just trying to survive, let alone innovate, which they need to innovate because they're in competitive industries. And the last comment I'll make is, and we've been fortunate, our company, to have a private family office fund our business from Montreal. It's patient capital, and smart capital and purpose-driven capital. And for them, a quarter is 25 years. So next generation. And deep tech, which I will argue that Canada needs to focus on quantum and AI horizontally across all the tech spaces, but mainly focused on climate tech, health tech, and digital tech, with energy and agri fitting under climate tech. But the patient capital family office, I don't know if people read the article or event that happened where several family offices came together for $400 million fund, Canadian family offices, just in the last 2 weeks, for a $400 million fund directed at climate change and sustainable technologies. So they're the capital. Venture capital is the time horizon is too short for deep tech, and they're not patient. We need to have a longer term, and it comes back to like a longer term strategy, irrespective of, government change that is run by private sector, but with a public-private partnership. And and focused on those bottlenecks in terms of accelerating, amplifying innovation.
Any comments from the panel on commercialization at universities or venture capital investments?
I completely agree with you with respect to the issues of TTOs. I've heard the same from the companies that we work with, usually accompanied with an eye roll. It is definitely a challenge, so I'm encouraged by the fact that the U15 are coming together in order to address this, and it brings a really important point up, which is this notion of trade-offs that needs to happen. And borrowing from my colleague here with respect to the example of Australia, where they have a single REB and things are streamlined, we need in Canada, instead of hanging on to our own little, corner of the yard, to be willing to say, you do this X, Y, Z really well, and we're going to let you do this. But we need to be speaking about trade-offs and achieve this bigger vision of alignment. With respect to the family office and that longer-term thinking capital, I know I've heard some great examples recently from Amplitude Ventures of an example of a technology that they're commercializing. It's out of the US and specifically is supported by patient capital, by a pension fund, by the state, I believe, of Wisconsin. So it's great to hear, and we need more of that in Canada, that patient capital, because yes, VCs have very short time horizons, 6 to 7 years at most, and then they, will exit, and we know what that looks like here in this country. So thank you.
Dave, go ahead.
Yeah. On your first issue in terms of the tech transfer office, I think you're exactly right. There's such a fragmentation across the country, and within the university, you'll either have the researcher own the IP or the university, or there'll be some kind of a combination and a mix of that. So very, very confusing. And for a firm, they may need different pieces of intellectual property from different universities who have different structures and ways of organizing it. So it makes quite a mess. It raises the question, well, why can't they get together in terms of creating some kind of a patent pool for easy access? And if you're going to do that, then why don't we throw in public sector patents into there? So the National Research Council has a whole patent inventory. Other government departments have as well, so you make that accessible. So that again gets into this collective approach. And let me build on that theme again. On your second issue in terms of tech adoption, I couldn't agree more. The approach we're taking to productivity in terms of supporting businesses is primarily a one-off. So the SIF fund, $12 billion has been allocated so far to 75 firms, individual firms. What kind of productivity increase are you going to get from that? The IRAP generally helps one firm at a time. It does have some collective things, and SIF has a nascent initiative in that way as well. But the Europeans have a different approach. So not the Fraunhofer, but there is a business association of business associations in Germany. In German, it's a stunningly long name. It has existed since 1954. It is the supporter of the Mittelstand. It has 50,000 members. And they do collective research, pre-competitive research for all of the firms. They go out and they ask them, what are the challenges you're facing in terms of accessing global markets? What are the common elements of research that you need done? We will do that, and we make it available to everybody. So you multiply the impact. We haven't learned that in Canada, and we should look at some of these models. If you could increase the productivity of there are 1,300,000 firms in Canada by 1%, as opposed to allocating and focusing on just a few firms, you would increase productivity. Now, I just want to make sure, I'm not arguing that you don't help those individual firms. I'm just saying if you want to improve productivity, there are other ways of doing it. And I think technology adoption is actually a key thing we should be looking at.
Maybe very quick. We did a special unique model with the state district, with the chiefs, one of the chief scientists, where we basically created an RTM. It was owned in numbers. Our company owned 95%. All of the universities own 5% collectively.
Interesting.
And we put together a pre-seed fund. Okay? And there was an inter-university agreement amongst all the universities because they collaborate in our technology process. we brought IP, the initial IP platform. And so once things become, as you hit the milestones of projects, we chose specific projects that were focused in certain areas and had certain commercial metrics that they had to make, or had to, that they had. And then once they became a startup, then the same structure was duplicated in a startup. So the universities, which is broken down by university and tech transfer, because they operate separately as different, separate entities. They received they weren't diluted, they were 25%. And once started sales coming in, or revenue started coming in, we paid a agreed upon royalty, so they stuck with the royalty licensing general agreement of universities. It was lower than normal because they had the equity, and then there was a kicker to the research teams, certain dollar amount once it went to so it was bringing everyone.
Interesting model.
And it was pre-seed.
You know what? No one else can hear you at the back of the room because you're not on a mic, and also the translation is not coming through because you're not on a mic. So yeah, but I'm just going to go over a question over here, and then we can follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm recognizing how short I am with this microphone. My name is Don Eldridge, and I'm with eCampus Ontario. We actually represent the 53 publicly supported institutions in Ontario, universities, colleges, and Indigenous institutes. Really appreciating the conversations hearing today. I'm a little bit new to this space, but certainly recognizing kind of the multifaceted nature of the productivity challenges in Canada. Where eCampus has kind of inserted ourselves into these conversations, I want to highlight two things, I think, that are relevant to some of the stuff I'm hearing today. It was noted a few times around skills and having skills from the labor market to actually support innovation in the economy. So we've spent a lot of time within the micro-credential space at eCampus Ontario, developing essentially a single point where industry and learners can actually see all of the various credentialing options that are available across the province that are intricately connected with labor market data. So that the learners and institutions and employers can actually see where this credentialing can have the most impact in the economy. And we're continuing to grow and scale that across other jurisdictions outside of Ontario. Particularly the second item that I want to mention, very relevant here, is our Ontario Collaborative Innovation Platform. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years inventorying on the academic side, the hundreds of facilities, experts, and equipment that is available within higher education at colleges, universities, that can support innovation. On the other side of that equation, we've been building out the network of businesses that actually have the innovations. They have the ideas, but they need the support of academia to bring those to a commercialized idea. So we've actually taken on the effort of doing a lot of the work for enterprise and industry to make those connections. So it has the ability for business to actually register within our platform. Through that, they can submit an innovation challenge around whatever it is they're working on. We then, using an algorithm and fairly sophisticated AI, as well as some human intervention, actually then go through the inventory of the facilities we know are available in Ontario and connect that innovation challenge to a subject matter expert that can actually help that business kind of think through all the various aspects of commercializing their idea and developing a plan for that. Once that plan is actually returned back to the business, we actually then funnel the project down through various funding opportunities and hopefully see it move through to a full-scale project. So I've been hearing a lot about that kind of connectivity gap, and that's one of the, I just want to share with the audience, it's one of the innovations and the work that is going on right now, certainly in Ontario. We have the platform, and we are certainly working to scale that in other jurisdictions across the country, and we're certainly prepared to have those discussions. So certainly would love to connect with folks here this week if you'd like to find out more about it. But we do see it as being a significant contributor to at least one small part, I guess, of solving the productivity challenges in Canada today. So thank you.
Thanks. We'll go here, and then back over here.
So we're talking about a systems problem here with the innovation strategy for Canada. So David's example of just mentioning the tech transfer offices, so a hot button for me. It's an example, I guess, of the systems issues. But I have to respectfully disagree with David. I think the conversation that's been back and forth for many, many years about the structure of these things is absolutely a red herring. We can see examples in the world, next door in the US, of tech transfer offices where the IP is owned by the researchers or owned by the university. They're both successful, lots of examples. There's both examples of those where they're totally unsuccessful. So it's not about the structure, it's about relationships. It's about the attitude, the mentality, it's about incentives, and it's about leadership inside that organization. That's what determines the quality of the relationship between the academic institution and potential industry partners, many of whom have walked away years ago because it's just too hard to do something with the relationship. There's lots of successful examples, I know you're going to tell me, but we generally have more than a 50% problem in that area. That's not my point. It is in the sense of relationships. So we've heard about relationships, and that's really, really important. There's a bunch of intangibles here that are really the underpinning of how we can move forward. Trust was mentioned, hugely important. Back to that office of tech transfer where the two worlds meet. Trust. Without it, there's probably not going to be much coming out of the conversation. And those things are the intangibles that underpin whether or not the system can work. Do the players in the system see themselves as part of a system, or are we all here wanting to make sure we are defending our rice bowl, making sure our rice bowl stays full because that's our job, is survival of our institution. Well, if the incentives aren't there for that institution to be contributing to a larger aligned outcome in society, we've got a problem. But we do that all the time. We do it, we all do it. Our job, we're being paid to make sure we survive. That doesn't necessarily mean, if the incentives aren't right, that we're part of or see ourselves as part and deliver as part of a larger system that we have. I don't think we have to look necessarily all the way around the world for the solutions. I point to our friends in Quebec, who are their own entity in many ways, as we know. I lovingly refer to them as the Quebec Mafia. They've been I've been jealous for many years of how Quebec, and think about that, it's a cultural matter, it's a survival matter, it's a relationship matter, how they have designed their economic development system around technopoles. And some of you will be very familiar with the technopoles in Quebec. They're industry-led, they're funded by government. They are the innovation intermediaries at a sector-by-sector level, which gets things done. They're not all perfect, but they're a model that we should look at. And Quebec is very good societally of aligning the academic institutions, the business community, money, and infrastructure to get things accomplished. So we might look there. Thanks.
Great, thanks. We've only got about 9 minutes left, so I'm just going to jump over here to this question and then back over here.
Hi, Sally Dawood from the Clean Resource Innovation Network. We have federal funding, SIF funding, to fund the commercialization and adoption of clean tech. We are currently working on 68 projects. 25 of them are with research institutions, and we actively bring industry to all of these projects and ensure that they are actually investing in the projects to help with the commercialization. But what we found is that once the projects are done and the money in it, commercialization is not succeeding. It's not happening all the time. Certainly not at the rate we're hoping for. My question to you, and this is for anyone on the panel, I've heard a couple of comments that investment tax credits are not useful, that our research productivity is low because of potentially industry involvement. Can you maybe comment a bit on what you think industry could be doing differently? Because what we've seen is they're actually pulling a lot of their investment dollars sometimes because they get punished by their shareholders when they go and invest in something that's not quite proven yet.
Panel?
Can I just get a clarification when you say industry? What industry are you referring to?
So the focus has been oil and gas, but we are actually working with all heavy emitting industries.
Yeah, I have an observation on that because I've wrestled with in the minerals industry. So, and I'll cite, and I can't remember the name, but MIT did a study several years ago that said to groups like ours, do not start an innovation project without someone in an operation demanding the technology. It doesn't matter if the request comes out of a corporate R&D group or a corporate innovation group or a government or whatever, academic, don't start it unless someone in an operation says, I need that technology. MIT study, they fail without that. And we live some of that experience too. Once an operation says, we want the technology, the money comes, the investment comes, it gets tied to productivity, they don't get shareholder pushback. But if it's, there is a desire to 20 years from now have a new technology because the world will be a better place, good luck getting that funded.
I agree with you. And I think that is what we are doing, is making sure that industry tells us these are problems they want to solve. The challenge here, though, is that that is not always aligned with goals like decarbonization. So operations is less focused on decarbonization.
Yeah, I agree. And that might be a general challenge. Many Israeli people, maybe where GE a long time ago had a 70-20-10 rule. I think it still largely holds for industry that 70% of our innovation investment is on today. It's on the operations we're running today. 20% are maybe on those operations that will come, and 10% is far off in the future. I don't necessarily agree that's the best rule from an innovation perspective, but that's largely where industry is. And you're right, that puts us often on a different page than government funding programs, for example, which aren't necessarily looking at how do we make what we have today more productive. It is, be transformative. Everyone wants the new light bulb. Everyone wants the big transformative change. But for industry, we get a huge amount of value along the way. And we need that recognized somehow, not only from potential funders and partners, but I think from our academic partners too, because everyone wants a new product. I need process improvements. I can get huge wins off process improvements.
Amir?
Yeah, I just want to comment on the interlink between commercialization and taxation relief. If you look at, there's a policy called IP box, or the patent box. It's something that was actually established in the UK a number of years ago. And frankly, as a result of that, and how it works basically is that if you're able to create IP, but take it to commercialization, and that's a catch, and demonstrate that you've created revenue and profits as a result, then you benefit from quite a substantial tax relief, from 15 or 20, 25% to almost 4 or 5. Evidence shows that that has had a large impact, in fact, on the economy of London in the UK. And that's why it became a powerhouse. Actually, London generates about 24% of GDP of the whole UK. They've attracted not only domestic startup companies and others, but they've attracted international innovators to come up to the country to establish in that. So it's something that we have to also reflect on, is that how do we stimulate the commercialization through some taxation incentives. And actually, if there's somebody from the room from Quebec, Quebec was the first province to implement IP box. obviously it's early in the stages, but something to look forward to see what results they have.
I'm going to go to the last question. We've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the last question because we have a little bit of housekeeping to do before we break.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you to the panel for an outstanding presentation. I really enjoyed it. My name is Terry Ross. I work with the National Cybersecurity Consortium. To begin with, I just wanted to mention that I'm very interested in promoting vendor-neutral emissions data standards to help around the supply chain. So there's something I'd like to talk to anybody who's interested in emissions data. But my main question is about Canadian productivity, and I'm a bit concerned that we're kind of maple lighting ourselves a little bit because the number one export, as I understand it, from Canada is hydrocarbon fuels, and it's not even close. And the most productive industry in Canada is also the oil and gas industry. And we have an imposed situation where we have to transition. We have to innovate. There's no way that we can keep emitting. My question is, do you feel that the industrial policy and innovation policy in Canada is going to allow that energy industry to transition collaboratively with the rest of the country? Or do you feel that we're kind of being a little confrontational amongst ourselves federally, provincially, and even as citizens about what our energy policy should be?
Anybody on the panel want to tackle that one?
Well, I'm from Saskatchewan. We're one of two provinces that is in a standing fight with the federal government on energy policy. But I come at it differently, I guess, from an innovation perspective. 80% of world energy use is still hydrocarbons. Everything we've done on renewables, on nuclear, on hydro, for all our lives, we're still 80% hydrocarbon based. To change that is a huge systemic issue and a huge technology issue. Again, if you go back to that, all the technology we need to replace that doesn't exist. You know, if you're going to swap out 80% of the world that's still in energy and try and go electric, because we're all supposed to go electric, right? For example, force set down that's not going to happen by 2030 or 2040. I will even offer a personal view 2050. Because the multiple numbers of times you have to change the energy system is enormous. And the resources required. So it's intertwined. I think the truth is, for a period of time, the two worlds are have to coexist. We're going to have to continue to find a better way of making use of fossils because we're going to be using it while we transition. And that's going to take time and effort, and it's going to take, honestly, collaboration. So I think in one of my consultations, I said, it does not help an industry like ours if one arm of government is not speaking well of it. It is hard for us to attract young people in the industry if we're being talked in a very negative fashion all the time. It's hard for us to attract people into our sector. And again, and our sector is one we think absolutely critical to that transition. So it's an interesting challenge for us as a country. So,
Okay, I'm going to end it there because we're ready for a break. Shauna, can we get the slide up for the questions? Thanks. So we're going to take a break. I want to thank the panel very much for an excellent conversation. Thank you so much. What we're going to do next after the break, we're going to take a quick 15-minute health break, and we're going to come back. And the last part of the symposium is, what are the next steps? So CSPC has initiated this pilot project on Canada's innovation strategy. Where do we take it from here? And so we're going to have 3 questions that we're going to pose to the audience. And these are the questions that we're going to ask you. They're going to be available on Slido so that you can actually upload your answers on Slido. And I think Slido's available. It's a web-based app, so you can just use your phone and use your browser and go to Slido. And we'll be activating the questions one at a time when we come back from the break. So what we're looking for from you is your ideas on these 3 questions. What key challenges and opportunities within the innovation ecosystem have not been addressed in today's discussion? I can imagine there's just so many different things we've talked about today, it's hard to keep track of. What specific actions or next steps would you recommend strengthening engagement with stakeholders and impact within the innovation ecosystem? And how do you envision you or your organization's role in contributing to the innovation ecosystem's growth and success? So that's what we're going to do when we come back from the 15-minute break. We're back here at 11:30. Thanks, everyone.